Hello and welcome back to Matt's Automotive Channel. In this video, we're going to be pulling the motor in order to put a new clutch in. And I know it's awkward for me to be pulling a motor to put a clutch in. Normally you pull the transmission, but this engine is having a few issues, and so I thought it'd be easier just to go ahead and pull the motor, and then it gives me good access to work on the motor and do some checks and that sort of thing, and also at the same time give me access to the transmission, the bell housing, the clutch, and all the components that I need to replace. So anyway, that's why I'm taking that approach. Here are the components that I'm going to be putting into the car. Got a brand new flywheel. This is a lightweight flywheel, at least it's lighter than the OEM one. Of course, new clutch and pressure plate and release bearing or throw out bearing. Just so you know, heads up, I'm going to kind of gloss over all the details on pulling the motor from this, since I've done this in great detail on another video that I will provide a link to at the end of this video. So this part's going to go pretty fast. I'll probably do a lot of time-lapse video for pulling the motor, and I will go through each of the steps and just generally describe what I'm doing, but I'm going to move through this pretty quick. So anyway, just to give you a heads up, let's get started. All right, as you can see, I've already moved the intercooler for when doing the other test. As far as pulling the motor, there is a hook right here, and the other hook is actually on this AC compressor bracket, which is located right here. So I'm going to use those 2 points to actually pull it. But before we pull it, we're going to have to drain the coolant, get the radiator out here, and the two things that we have to take off this motor on the front of it anyway is the AC compressor and the power steering pump, and these are just going to be kind of flopped over to the side, and that should free up everything that we need on the motor. There is a grounding strap on the bottom, and then of course the exhaust and wiring harnesses and that sort of thing, some vacuum hoses, coolant hoses, but anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is remove the air box. Okay, to go much further, I'm going to have to get underneath the car and remove the exhaust and also drain the coolant. So before I get it up in the air, I think I'm going to go ahead and take off a couple of these bolts here around the turbo. Then once we're underneath the car, we can just undo the others and then pull the whole downpipe out. Okay, for your info, I was able to get all the turbo housing bolts out from the top. I think it's easier from the top. And this has been off before. I know that it has gotten a new turbo at some point, which means the downpipe has been off. It also had the head gaskets recently done, I think about 3,000 miles ago. And it's just amazing how things don't go back. I mean, obviously the heat shield isn't on there. The bracket for the heat shield isn't on there. This downpipe's supposed to bolt up against the transmission here. Missing bolt there. Another one back here, gone, just not replaced. So anyway, I'll go ahead and pull these bolts here and then just go ahead and remove the downpipe. And then after that, we'll go ahead and start draining coolant. Okay, before we pull these remaining bolts here, we have an O2 sensor that we need to deal with. And it looks like there's a long wire there, this yellow one. Goes up to that bracket there, so we'll disconnect it from there, and then there's a little keeper there on the side of the transmission that we'll have to pull out first. Now we can go ahead and drain the coolant, and we're going to drain it right from there, so we just need like a little Phillips head. And we'll get a bucket underneath and capture it. I'm going to capture this, and we may end up reusing it. Since the head gaskets were done about 3,000 miles ago, it's very likely this is still good coolant. So we'll capture it and check it out. Okay, now while we got the coolant draining, we can go ahead and start draining the oil as well. Okay, and then while the oil is draining, we can go ahead and pull the grounding straps. There's supposed to be 2 of them. This is here on the driver's side, so we'll just disconnect that. And I believe the one over here was never replaced. You can see it's supposed to go right here and then over to the head, and it's just missing. Okay, now that the oil is drained, we can go ahead and pull the oil filter. Now we can go ahead and remove the lower radiator hose and also remove the nuts on the motor mounts. Now with the lower radiator hose removed and the motor mount nuts, we can go ahead and turn our attention to the top of the motor. Now we can go ahead and remove the coolant overflow tank, the radiator, the upper radiator hose, and after that we'll go ahead and pull the power steering pump and the AC compressor. All right, with the car back up in the air, I went ahead and pulled all the bell housing bolts. There's a couple of studs down at the bottom, and the others are just bolts. Okay, with the car back on the ground, I went ahead and pulled the two coolant lines going to the heater core. So those are out, bell housing bolts are out, starter is out. So I think we're ready to pull this thing. So we'll hook up the crane to it and support the transmission with a floor jack and then pull the motor. Okay, so then to disconnect the fuel line, just get a fuel disconnect tool, put it around the line. And it should just separate like this. Now in this one, I'm using a 5/16. And there we go. We have those off. Now the center one here, this is the return line, and it's just a regular hose clamp. So just slide that back. And, wow, that's on there pretty good. There we go. There we go, those are disconnected now. Okay, so now we have the crane hooked up and we're supporting the transmission with the floor jack. As you can see, got it supported right there. That way it won't come clunking down when we separate the engine from the transmission. Okay, and then we also have disconnected our wiring harnesses. There's two, there's one here and one here. And now we got everything supported and we should be able to separate the transmission now. Now in some of the later model ones, I know like the 2013s, the turbo will make contact with the bell housing. So it's very difficult to separate it. And in that case, you'd want to loosen a couple of these bolts to give a little bit of wiggle room for the turbo. But I don't believe we need to on the 05. This is a little balancing act here. So it looks like too much of the back part of the motor being supported, so we need to pull up the front a little bit more. That's why it's nice to have the load leveler like this, so we can shift the weight back and forth. So I'm gonna crank this thing and then move it till where we support more of the front of the motor. And then it should, just to line it up with the transmission so it comes. The other thing you want to make sure before you start to separate it is make sure that the engine is up high enough that the motor mount studs are out of the K-member. All right, now we should be able to separate the motor. The only thing is you have to make sure that the motor is up high enough that the motor mounts are off the K-member. And there we go. It's obviously off the motor mounts. And now we should just be able to separate this thing. Okay, we're totally separated now. So we can go ahead and haul this thing out. Okay, here's the condition of the old throw-up bearing. Not much lube left in there. It's pretty much worn out. Looks like this clutch definitely has some age on it. Looks like it's been around a while. It may be the original, I don't know. So anyway, let's go ahead and get this thing off. All right, so There we go. Oh yeah, this has seen better days. Clutch is near the end of its life. And yeah, some pretty good burn marks here on the pressure plate. And also on the flywheel. Now, as you can see here, this is a dual mass flywheel. And so you can see that those bolts are not lining up. So we're gonna have to twist this a little bit to get them to line up and get it out. And of course, we're gonna replace this with just a single mass flywheel. It'll be much lighter weight. These, I've been told that you can't resurface anyway. I don't know how true that is, but anyway, this thing has seen better days, and I just soon replace it. So anyway, to get these bolts to line up with the holes, we got to kind of tap this over. I thought these were spring loaded and they should self-center, so maybe this is part of the problem. I don't know. A little bit more. Okay. Let's see if that does any better. That's pretty good. All right, this is one of these Torx Bit Pluses. So I'm on here, and then I'm holding the crank with the specialty tool over here. And we'll break all of these loose. All right, now that we have them all broken loose, we can zip these out quickly. Okay, now we can pull it off. And there we go. Wow, that is a very heavy flywheel. And you can see it's relatively thick too. Okay, we now have the engine moved from the hoist over to the engine stand, where it will be easy to do some follow-up tests and determine whether we need to rebuild this motor or not. Fingers crossed, I'm hoping we don't have to do that. Nonetheless, we now have access to the clutch and flywheel, so we can go ahead and swap that out. And I think I'll call it quits here for this video, and we'll resume on testing the motor on the next video. I'll catch you then. Bye-bye.